I lived for years controlled by my mother and husband. What happened next will shock you. I never thought I'd be able to write something like this, but I feel the need to share it, as if getting this out of me would allow me to breathe again. For so long, I lived trying to please everyone. My mother, my husband, my friends, even strangers in some situations. But in the midst of it all, I disappeared. My voice, my desires, my dreams, everything seemed to have been swallowed by a cloud of guilt and fear. I remember entire nights lying in bed, my chest tight, my breath shallow, as I tried to understand why, even surrounded by people who claimed to love me, I felt so alone. It was as if my body was there, but my soul had long since hidden behind walls I'd built myself to survive the constant control. And the worst part is, I didn't realize how much I was destroying myself until one day it all exploded in a way I could no longer ignore. My name is Camilla. I'm 32 years old, and I'm writing this in 2025, trying to put into words an entire decade of submission, fear, and manipulation. I grew up with Lucia, my mother, who always knew how to use guilt as a weapon. My every move was watched. Every decision had to be scrutinized by her. Sergio, my father, was a passive ghost, always absent, always avoiding any confrontation. He watched quietly as my mother shaped my life, as if I were a puppet. And then came Andre, my husband, who at first seemed different, loving, understanding, something I'd never had. But over time, he demonstrated the same coldness, the same control, the same standards I'd learned to accept as normal. I was surrounded by invisible walls, with locked doors, but I never realized I was locking myself away. The moment that changed everything wasn't a grand cinematic drama. It was a simple yet devastating conversation with my friend Tanya. She looked at me with that look that awakens what's hidden within us and said, "Camilla, you don't need to live for anyone else, not your mother, not Andre. The only one who truly knows you is yourself." I laughed nervously, but my body trembled. No one had ever said that so directly, so bluntly, so non-judgmental. It was in that moment that I realized my entire life had been shaped by fear and submission. My head spun, my heart raced, and a mixture of anger and relief washed over me. I knew that if I continued the way I was, I would disappear completely. And this time, no one would miss me. The sense of our urgency was like an electric shock. I needed to react, even without knowing exactly how. The first steps were nearly impossible. Fear paralyzed me, guilt pounded me, and every time I tried to impose my own decision, I felt like I was betraying someone, even though I knew no one had any right to my life. I felt a mixture of anger and shame, like a child who didn't deserve to grow up. Andre noticed the change and reacted as always. Silent pressure, coldness, subtle attempts to make me return to being the perfect wife. My mother continued her campaign of manipulation, messages, calls, criticisms disguised as advice. My body felt like it weighed tons, my stomach was churning, my head was spinning, but something inside me told me I couldn't back down. I felt at war with myself, but for the first time, I felt like I had a weapon, my will to exist as Camilla, not as the shadow everyone expected me to be. The decision to change didn't come from a heroic moment. It came from a mixture of exhaustion and clarity. I realized I couldn't wait any longer, that if I didn't take control of my life, no one would do it for me. It was painful to realize that everything I had built around pleasing others didn't truly belong to me. I began writing down my desires, my thoughts, my emotions, unfiltered, just for myself. Sitting at the kitchen table and crying as I wrote everything down was liberating. Each written word seemed to untie an invisible knot in my chest. My body was finally breathing. My mind was beginning to clear. I still trembled with fear, but for the first time, I felt that the decision wasn't about confronting others, but about reclaiming who I was. That small internal revolution was the first real step toward my freedom. The beginning of the change was confusing and painful. Each small act of autonomy felt like an earthquake inside me. I decided, for example, to refuse invitations I didn't want, to say no when my body demanded rest. And as simple as this seemed, I felt as if I were betraying an ancient law my mother and husband had imposed on me. I trembled, my heart racing, my throat dry, but I realized that each refusal was a small victory, a reaffirmation that I could exist without approval. Yet at the same time, waves of guilt hit. What if I'm being selfish? What if I destroy everything? These thoughts paralyzed me for hours a day, and I needed to take a deep breath. Remember, Tanya, that my desires mattered. Each step was a test of courage and patience with myself. Andre began to react in subtle ways. Disapproving looks, ironic comments disguised as jokes, small criticisms of my habits and choices. My mother, as always, appeared out of nowhere, with long, guilt-ridden messages, trying to convince me I was wrong, that I was abandoning my duties. My chest felt heavy, as if someone had placed a backpack full of rocks on top of me. But for some reason, I still don't fully understand. The strength that came from the desire to find myself again was greater than any external manipulation. I began to realize that their voices weren't my reality. They were echoes of years of control and submission I had normalized. I learned, little by little, to separate what was mine from what was imposed. The rebuilding process was full of setbacks. There were days when I gave in to pressure, accepted invitations I didn't want, said words I didn't mean, just to calm the storm at home. I felt guilty, weak, and indignant with myself. But there were also days of small victories. I chose my own online course, signed up for photography classes, started going for walks alone and feeling my body in space, without anyone watching or judging me. Each small achievement strengthened me. I began to recognize my own needs, desires, and limits. My body began to relax. My thoughts became clearer, and that suffocating feeling of being trapped began to ease. I was rediscovering myself. Tanya was my anchor in this process. Long conversations, sometimes late into the night, helped me bring order to my inner chaos. She reminded me that guilt was a weapon, that I had the right to make mistakes, to retreat, to try again. One day, she told me something that stuck with me. Camila, you don't have to wait for someone to free you. You hold the key within you. I felt a mixture of anger, relief, and fear, but also a courage I'd never known. I began to understand that freedom wasn't an external event, but a daily achievement that required presence, attention, and self-love. I realized I needed to strengthen my mind, body, and heart, and that this was a process no one could accelerate for me. With each step, painful memories surfaced that I had to confront. Memories of my childhood with my demanding mother, my father's absence, Andre's petty manipulations over the past few years. I cried alone, trembling, reliving moments of humiliation, of suppressed anger, of fear. But I also began to laugh at some things, to acknowledge absurdities that had previously seemed normal. My body began to respond in ways I hadn't felt in a long time. Lighter breathing, less tense shoulders, a feeling of expansion in my chest. Each painful memory I faced and accepted made me stronger, less vulnerable to manipulation. I was learning that feeling pain didn't break me, it strengthened me. And it was in this process that I realized I could exist and deserved to exist without depending on anyone's approval. There were times when I thought about giving up. Every time Andre reacted coldly or sarcastically, or when my mother called to guilt trip me, my heart grew heavy, my palms sweated, and I felt like hiding again. It was as if each step forward brought a pull back. I wondered if all the struggle was worth it, if I truly deserved to have my own voice after so many years of living to please others. But deep down, a small flame wouldn't go out. It was a mixture of anger at myself for having allowed so much control and hope that finally, I could truly exist. The physical sensation was intense. Tightness in my chest, a lump in my throat, a restlessness that wouldn't let me sit, walk, or breathe in peace until I confronted my own limitations and fears. Each crisis consumed me, but also reminded me that something inside me still resisted, and that this resistance was the key to my freedom. The most important learning came from trial and error. I realized I couldn't expect everything to change all at once. When I tried to impose radical changes, the reaction of those around me scared me and almost made me retreat. But instead of giving up, I began to adjust my pace. Small changes, small refusals, small spaces of autonomy. I learned to set clear boundaries, even when trembling, even when afraid. Every time I said no or made a decision of my own, my body felt a mixture of tension and pleasure, the tension of facing others, and the pleasure of discovering I could exist outside the mold they'd imposed on me. With each step, I remembered Tunya and the conversations we'd had, and I felt less alone, more prepared to deal with the confrontations and resistance that arose from those who didn't want to see me different. The anger that had previously paralyzed me began to become fuel. Not a destructive anger, but an anger that reminded me of who I was and everything I'd let slip by. Memories of my mother manipulating me, of Andre controlling every detail of my daily life, of Sergio hiding behind. Silence. All of this drove me to keep going, to not back down, to seek every shred of autonomy I had left. Feeling this anger in my body was physical. It pulsed in my chest, burned in my arms, agitated my mind, but this time I used it to strengthen myself, not to destroy myself. I began to recognize my own strength, however small, and to understand that every step, every decision, however imperfect, was part of my reconstruction. I was learning to trust myself, to realize that my body, my emotions, and my thoughts were my allies, not my enemies. One of my greatest discoveries was that freedom doesn't mean the absence of fear. I still felt fear, but I learned to live with it without letting it dominate me. Going alone to places I'd previously avoided, making financial decisions without consulting anyone, expressing opinions without asking permission, all of this was frightening, but also invigorating. My body responded with tension, but also with a strange sense of expansion, as if each small act said, "You exist, Camila, and that is enough." My mind, previously filled with doubt and guilt, began to gain clarity. I understood that the control they'd had over me for years no longer needed to exist. I could create my own structure, my own limits, my own rules, and that wasn't selfishness. It was survival. It was life. It was true existence. Tanya continued to be my guiding light, my reference that change was possible. She helped me see my victories, even the small ones. I began to celebrate achievements that previously seemed insignificant. A decision made without guilt. A day I stood my ground in front of Andre. A conversation with my mother where I stood my ground without crumbling. Each victory reminded me that rebuilding wasn't a one-off event, but a daily process, full of ups and downs, mistakes and successes, but always moving forward. I began to feel my voice grow, my body feel lighter, my mind clearer. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my own life, even though the path was still long and full of obstacles. I was learning to exist as Camila, not as the shadow everyone wanted me to be. I began to realize that, to truly exist, I needed to confront what I'd always avoided: my relationships. With Andre, for example, every conversation became a test of boundaries. I learned to speak firmly, to hold my ground, even if my heart raced and my palms sweated. The first few times were awful. I stuttered, apologized before finishing the sentence, and felt anger mixed with fear coursing through my body. But with each attempt, with each insistence, my voice gained strength. I realized that he could no longer decide who I was, and that my own presence carried weight. I remember the day I, for the first time, ended an argument without giving in to emotional blackmail. I felt such profound physical relief. It felt like I was breathing for the first time in my life. Each confrontation left me exhausted, but it also strengthened me. I was learning that asserting myself wasn't aggression. It was survival. It was self-love. My mother continued to try to control me, sometimes attacking me with harsh words, memories of the past, and guilt. My body reacted the same way it had to the first steps of change. Tightness in my chest, cold hands, watery eyes. But now, I had tools. The awareness that her manipulation wasn't my responsibility, the ability to distance myself emotionally, and the support network I'd built. With Tanya, I learned to set clear boundaries, to choose when to speak, when to remain silent, and when to act. Every interaction became an opportunity to reaffirm my autonomy. Feelings of anger, sadness, and fear still occurred, but they no longer dominated me. I was rebuilding my emotional strength, and each small victory fueled me to move forward, even if my mother or Andre didn't like what I was becoming. At work, I started asserting myself as well. Before, I'd accepted extra tasks, kept quiet in the face of injustice, smiled when I wanted to cry. Little by little, I learned to set professional boundaries, to say no when necessary, to value myself. Each step seemed trivial, but it was symbolic. My body responded with a mixture of tension and pleasure, my heart beat faster, and my mind expanded with the feeling of control over my own life. I realized that each small act of courage, even within a seemingly ordinary context, was part of rebuilding my identity. My self-esteem began to grow subtly but steadily. I finally felt like the protagonist of my own story, and not just a spectator of others' expectations and desires. My friendship with Tanya deepened in ways I never imagined. Deep conversations, spontaneous laughter, non-judgmental confidences. All of this became a safe space where I could be myself. I began to recognize myself in the small joys, in the choices I made, in the sensations of my body free to move and breathe. Painful memories surfaced, but I faced them courageously, transforming pain into learning. My body responded differently. I felt a lightness in my chest, an energy in my arms, a clarity in my mind. Each moment of freedom, however brief, was a reminder that life could be lived without constant fear, and that I could indeed build something true for myself. It was during this period that I truly understood the value of existing as Camilla, not as the version everyone wanted. I cried, laughed, stumbled, got up, and learned that every step, no matter how small, had meaning. I realized that life wasn't about pleasing others, but about respecting yourself, recognizing yourself, allowing yourself to feel and act. My body grew accustomed to feeling pleasure in small victories. My mind strengthened with conscious choices, and my heart opened to a possibility that previously seemed impossible: genuine happiness. I was learning to rebuild my identity, to face old fears, and to accept that there were still painful but possible paths to follow. The physical sensation was concrete: open chest, relaxed shoulders, rhythmic breathing. And for the first time, I felt that freedom was real, even if it was built step by step. Over time, I realized I didn't need anyone's approval to fully exist. Andre and my mother still tried to interfere, but my body, mind, and heart were already trained to resist. Every challenge that arose, every provocation or criticism, I faced with awareness and determination. I learned to breathe deeply, set clear boundaries, and, above all, trust myself. My body responded with a sense of unprecedented strength. My heart beat lighter, and my mind was clearer than ever. That suffocating feeling that had plagued me for so many years diminished with each passing day, replaced by a clarity I never thought possible. For the first time, I felt that my decisions, my desires, and my dreams had real value, and that I was capable of building a life that was mine, not anyone else's. The rebuilding process wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, days when I felt fragile and vulnerable. But each stumble taught me something new, about limits, about courage, about self-love. I learned that feeling fear or sadness wasn't weakness, but part of being human. My body still reacted physically to tension: a tight chest, sweaty hands, a dry throat. But now I was aware of these signs and knew how to deal with them. Every victory, no matter how small, was celebrated. A sentence spoken without fear, a request for respected space, a moment of silence without guilt. All of this became fuel to keep going. I was rebuilding my identity, learning to live authentically, without masks. And this brought a sense of freedom that had previously seemed impossible. Today, as I write this, I feel my body and mind in balance. I still deal with remnants of pain, memories of manipulation, guilt, and fear, but they no longer define me. My heart feels light, my shoulders relax, and my breathing is finally calm. I look in the mirror and recognize the woman I've become, someone who endured years of submission, fear, and control, but who found the strength to break free, to rebuild herself, to take ownership of her own life. The physical sensation is concrete: firm pulses, open chest, steady gaze. Every decision I make, every conscious choice, every step toward emotional freedom reinforces that I am capable of existing and being happy, even after so much pain. I know my story isn't unique, and that's why I'm writing here, to show that there is a path even amidst pain, that it's possible to rise, breathe, cry, laugh, and grow stronger, that life can be built authentically, despite the manipulation, guilt, and fear imposed by others. Every step I've taken, every decision to respect myself, every act of courage, however small, has brought me here. And the physical sensation I feel now is proof that it's possible to transform pain into strength: a light chest, a clear mind, a balanced body. I am Camilla, and I am alive to myself. Not perfect, but whole, authentic, and courageous. Today, I fully exist, and I want anyone reading this to know that it is possible to succeed. It's not easy, it's not quick, but every step is worth it. The pain is there, the memories still resurface, and the fear still lingers. But now I know I can face them without losing my essence. The feeling of freedom, even if built slowly, is real and palpable. I can breathe, decide, feel, make mistakes, and get things right without depending on anyone's approval. My life is mine, my choices are mine, and my voice is finally heard, first by myself and then by the world. It is possible to exist, rebuild, and be happy, even after years of submission and control. I did it, and you can too.